All right, we're powering through these videos now. We're into video 4. And in this video, we're going to have a look at ink maps. I've got two examples here. The first one is this slideshow effect where we have this ink map over the top. The first thing I'm going to do is just right click, create a new composition here. And I want to go back to using my archival photos. So I'm just going to drag my first photo in here and I can scale this up very slightly. I can also come over here and add the black and white preset. And for this effect, I want to create two of these layers. So I'm just going to duplicate that layer. Now for the one underneath, I'm just going to turn off that top one. I want to come up to effect down to color correction and add the hue and saturation. Now this kind of effect works when we drag up on the lightness, so that the bottom one is a lighter color. As you can see in the original example, we have this light color and then the reveal kind of reveals a darker color. If we don't differentiate these two, we're not going to see that effect. Now with the top one turned back on, what I want to do is now drag in my ink map. This is the ink map here that I've supplied for you. Now to download this, it's part of your download package, but you have to download it via the link. So once you've downloaded that, you can bring it into After Effects and then just drag it on top of your footage. Now the way an ink map works is by having a black and white image. So part of the image is white and part of it is black. Now we can use that information as a Luma matte, and this is something that we looked at in the very first module of this course when using After Effects. This also works with any kind of image that is black or white. So it doesn't have to just be an ink map. An ink map is just this type of effect where we get, it looks like ink drops are dropping onto the screen. To demonstrate this, I've dragged it on top of my image, and we need to make sure that it's scaled up here. I can hit S on the keyboard, and that it's going to fill my entire frame here. If we have part of it off, it's not going to work. And with that layer selected, if I come down to toggle modes, I can come to the track matte settings and make this the Luma matte of the ink drops layer. So that's saying I want you to use that map that we have as that Luma matte. Now at the moment it's doing the opposite to what we want. So we want to invert this map, and it's going to say, okay, to the dark part of the image we want to make it transparent, and to the light part we want to keep it. Now the good thing about this is once I've got that map, I can drag this layer up and down by scaling it, and that will allow us to reposition that effect however we want. Now it's quite soft, that effect. So you can see where we've got that background image, we've added that lighter version of that image. So we want to make this front image a bit darker. So I'm going to come up to effect down to color correction, and I can add the curves effect. And if I drag down on this and up on this, that's what we call an S-curve. So the lower part of this graph here represents the darker parts of the image, and this represents the brighter parts of the image. So if I drag up on this point, it makes those parts brighter, and then it makes this part darker. So it's basically just adding contrast is another way of looking at this curve, but it just gives you much more control. So there we go, we created that effect. Now to create the zoom, like I did in my original composition, I can just right click and create a null object. With this null here on top, I can parent all those layers to that null. And now I have a controller, which I can create a scale keyframe here and also a position keyframe. And then if I go across to the end, I can bring those keyframes up by hitting U and create two more. And I can just create a nice little zoom effect here into my image, so we get that effect. The other thing I can also do, like we've done in all our compositions before, I can select all those layers, right click, make them easy ease, and then come into the graph editor. And I can just give these a slight curve here. And then I'll just make it a little bit more interesting. Now when it gets to about here, I can start dragging in my next image. So I'm just going to drag another image here on top. This one I also want to apply that black and white effect, and I'll scale up here. I want to parent this one to my null, and I want to drag in on the end here so that it basically appears in our shot. I can then duplicate that layer. Now with the original layer, what I can do is copy that lighten effect and put that on the bottom one. And with my top one, I can also take that curves and add the curves again. And then I can also take the ink map, drag that on top, and then set that layer to use that as the ink map. Also have to drag in on this layer so it controls the start of that ink map, and there we go, we have that finished effect. This effect is now widely used across mainstream media, and it's a great effect for doing this sort of thing where you have maybe archival photos or anything like that. It just kind of has that slight vintage look to it, and it works really well for doing this kind of effect. In this next example, I'm going to show you how to use this effect over a map. So I want to start by creating a new composition here and then hit OK. I want this effect to have a paper look, so I'm going to drag in this paper layer here and just drag it down or scale it down. Then I want to drag in my world map. We're going to be using a lot of maps in the next module of this course, but this is the first time that we're going to be using this map as a vector image. You also have to download this. I've put download links in your download folder for this file. It's an EPS file, so we have to now click this little button and that's going to scale it up. And with that layer, I can come up to Effect, down to King, and I can use the extract tool and just remove the white part of that image. I can then scale this right up because it's a vector, so I'm not going to lose any quality by zooming into this. And then I can just reposition it here on our screen. What I also did with this layer is I changed the color of the map. So I came up to Effect, down to Generate, and added the Fill effect, and you can make this whatever color you want. For mine, I'm using this blue color, but yours can be whatever you like. Now to get that paper texture of that layer behind, again, we've done this before. We can come into the modes and make this multiply, and that'll give us that paper texture of that layer in behind. And it's always good to do this with your animations because it just makes them a little bit more believable and just a bit more interesting. For the ink map, we're going to be using a different file here, and it's this one here. You can also download that via the link in your download folder. I just drag this here on top. Now for this one, what we want to do is we want to do the opposite that we did before. We basically want to use this map to reveal a map on top, if that makes sense. So to show you what I mean, I'm going to take my map layer and just duplicate that and drag it on top. So we've got two maps that are exactly the same, and that's really important. Then we can take that ink map layer and set this to be the ink map of that layer above. Now what I can do is if I come up to my layer down to color correction, I can add the tint effect, and I can start messing around with these colors here, which will affect the original colors here of this map. But this will basically just give you control over that image. You can mess around with this until you get the exact result that you're happy with. Now that we've got that map, we can basically scale this and move it however we want. Now you will see the edges here. One way around that is by drawing a mask and then feathering that mask. But I'm going to show you another little thing here. You can either just scale this up. Now the quality of that will deteriorate as you start dragging that up because that is not a vector map, that image. You can increase the quality by clicking this little button here, and that'll make it a little bit sharper. But you just got to be aware of that if you're dragging that up even higher. A good way around this is by using a high resolution ink map. So if you can find one that's like 4K or 8K resolution, then you're going to find that this is going to be a lot sharper. Now to make the 3D effect, what we can do is we can create a camera. It can be 35mm here, that's fine. I can make all of these 3D. Now I can grab my camera tool here and just pan down. And I can also just scale in here by dragging in like this. Might just drag my camera over here. And then I can also always grab my background layer, my paper layer, and just scale this over to hide that. I can even scale this up. And all I want to do with this layer is if I come down to my camera settings, I can hit a point of interest and a position keyframe here. And I'm just going to basically move this up. And I can just scale out very slightly here. So we kind of get a little bit of movement there, just makes it look a little bit more interesting. Now your computer might start to slow down a little bit here because there's a lot going on. You can always adjust the resolution if playback becomes too slow, but you can see the effect that we're creating here. We're creating this drop of the ink on our map. Now at the moment we're seeing the entire map. So what you could do with that ink map selected, I could even go in here and create a mask that sort of goes around this layer. So I'm just doing a rough mask here. You could spend a lot more time masking this, but then you get that basically localized to that area. Now we have that effect localized to that map layer. Now we're going to have a look at maps a lot more in the next module. We're going to be making lots of different maps. Another thing you can do is it will depend on the ink map that you're using, but the effect is quite fast. That is because this clip or the ink drop is moving in really fast. So I could use another video clip that's a bit slower. I could even come in here and just go to time and go time remapping. If I create a point maybe halfway through the middle here and drag out, that'll slow down that animation a little bit there at the start. But for the best results, I'll just go and find another ink map that works a little bit better. All right, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to start looking at 2D animation, and then you're ready to dive into the next module. If you have any questions on this particular video or any of the other videos in this course, then don't hesitate to let me know.